Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the FamilyDeal.com 7 Sports Cave. I am your host, Justin Rose. On tonight's show, we're talking Pistons season opener on Wednesday and Thursday. A couple of guys in here who know a little bit about that. James Edwards from The Athletic, Rod Beard from the Detroit News, Mike Rothstein, he stops by down at Ford Field. We chat about the Lions' loss today, and that's where we'll start the show right now. Oh, coming up later, I want to tell you, we got a cool story about a brand new place that's opening down at MGM Grand Detroit with sports betting potentially being a part of its big future. We'll see if that can get done, but that story is coming up in a little bit. Let's start with the Lions today. They needed a win to stop the bleeding. 2 straight losses, 2 close losses, but the Chiefs and the Packers got victory. So getting a win at home today against the Vikings will go a long way of turning the season around, getting back on the winning track. Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones, after the catch by Marvin Jones to get into the end zone. That made it 7-0. The Vikings would tie it with an Adam Thielen score, but the Lions marched back down the field. Stafford finding, guess who? Marvin Jones Jr. for the second score of the game, 14-7. The Vikings would score on their next 2 possessions. Dalvin Cook, he got in from 8 yards out to give the Vikings their first lead, 21-14. But the Lions, well, just before halftime, they were able to conjure up a little more success because they went back to what's working. Marvin Jones Jr. for the 3rd time today, 21-21 at the break. Now, in the second half, the Vikings scored a touchdown while the Lions had to kick a field goal. They were down by 4 driving, but this was the play call on 4th and 2. Not a lot of people in that building or at home were happy about it. Not really open either. They weren't even going to get it. The Vikings, they took advantage of it because they took that ball from that spot down to score. Kyle Rudolph gives them an 11-point lead there. The teams would trade touchdowns. Stafford links up with Jones for his 4th touchdown of the day, but the Lions defense, they were unable to stop anything today, especially the run. They gave up 166 yards on the ground, 500 total yards of offense for the Vikings, 42-30. The final score. Plenty of disappointment to go around in the Lions locker room after this one.
From that standpoint, it's got to be better. We got to be able to stop the run and just, try to do everything we can to be consistent with that week in, week out. We have some really good plays where we, get some negative yards and we stop the run from that aspect of it. And then some plays where we obviously don't, and we create some big seams and gaps in there that they're able to exploit. And, until we get that fixed, we're going to keep seeing it.
The way the game was going, we needed to score more, and I wasn't able to get it done. Whether it was another one late or maybe one earlier. It kind of keeps it maybe a little bit closer later in the game. That's just how I am as a player. If we lose a game, there's a throw out there that I could have made that maybe helps us. And, there are a few out there today that I obviously, could have given us a chance.
Now, a significant milestone from today's game included Matthew Stafford in it. He reached 40,000 career passing yards, doing so in this 36-yard completion to Danny Amendola. Now, Stafford is the 21st quarterback in league history to reach that mark. He's also the fastest to ever do it. He passed Hall of Famer Johnny Unitas on the all-time list today. Now, here's a look at where Stafford sits on that list. He's one of 8 active quarterbacks in the top 20, total of 40,277 yards after today, less than 300 behind Hall of Famer Joe Montana in the 19th spot. Back down in Ford Field now with Michael Rothstein from ESPN.com. And look, disappointment was the word that I heard over and over and over again out of every player's mouth. And it just seemed like there wasn't that much energy in this building today. And that starts with on-the-field product for the fans to get excited about. But what did you see when you kind of felt like this was kind of the inevitable outcome basically throughout?
Well, it's actually interesting because I actually thought there was a lot of energy in here at the beginning, but toward the refs, because that was the loudest you heard this crowd all day. It was when the refs came out on the field in warm-ups, which you don't see on television. They were booed lustily. I haven't heard boos like that in a long, long time. And then you heard during the coin toss, and you heard any time that they talked. So the fans at least were still bitter over Green Bay. I don't think that was the case with the Lions. It's the same problems over and over again, Justin. They can't stop the run. They got fooled by play action. They're not getting pressure on any quarterbacks at this point. And that's a recipe for losses week after week after week against teams that are good in this league. And that's what you've seen the last 3 weeks. They've been competitive against Kansas City, Green Bay, and Minnesota, but when it comes to getting off the field in critical situations, when it comes to stopping any running back, they just can't do it. And that's going to be a huge problem over the last 2.5 months of the year.
Well, and the missed tackles. I mean, that was something that was so glaring to me because it seemed like the Lions were in the backfield stuffing Dalvin Cook, and he'd just get out of it. And the failure to finish is a theme we're starting to see, finishing, because Kansas City had the lead, didn't finish. Same thing, Green Bay had the lead, didn't finish. Today, had the lead, then you didn't have it late, but you didn't finish. And it's just starting to creep into more and more elements of the game.
I would agree with that. Dalvin Cook's a special back, though. Let's just start there. I mean, what you saw from him, he's very hard to get down on that first tackle. And one thing I actually was impressed by with the Lions was they were able to really string him out and string him out to the outside. But then he was able to break those tackles and not maybe contain or 1 or 2 players. And then that was it. And he'd get a 10-yard run, a 12-yard run. And the thing to me that maybe is more troublesome than anything else is that's the focal point for Minnesota. There's no bones about that. That's what Minnesota wants to do. You know that coming in, and you get smoked for 167 yards, 142 of them by Dalvin Cook. And frankly, I think Dalvin Cook could have maybe named his number today.
Yeah.
And when you look at next week with Saquon Barkley coming in, I know maybe Saquon isn't at the full picture of health at this point.
He looked pretty good today. I had that game on.
Yeah, that has to be a concern because it's going to be a similar game plan, you think, for the Giants when they play the Lions. And in a similar situation, too, Daniel Jones, kind of similar to Kirk Cousins a little bit. And, that other guy, that Golden Tate guy.
Yeah, he's coming back.
Who was here last year. Yeah. You don't think he's going to want to have a big game against these guys? After they traded him away, after they wouldn't pay him? Oh, man. I think it could be really interesting next week. And if I'm the Lions losing 3 straight, if I'm Matt Patricia in a really tough division where it feels like it's starting to come off the rails a little bit, I got to be really concerned.
Right, yeah, this is definitely going to be a stopgap game for the Lions' problems because you can't lose to a team that just lost to the team that you tied with at the beginning of the season today. But going back to that pass rush, and Kirk Cousins, I mean, he could have called his number today as well. Yeah. No pressures. Did he even get sacked once today? If he did, it wasn't a big, huge play. It wasn't a tide-turning play. But, I mean, where is this vaunted front line? Where is this front 7 that coming into the season we thought, oh, wow, this is going to be a special unit? It's just that.
I think where it is it's stuck behind 3-man rushers and 4-man rushers and not blitzing. I asked Matt Patricia that after the game. He said, listen, we called more of that today, and you saw what happened. Well, that's maybe even more concerning and more problematic than anything else, is that if you actually dialed up more blitzes, and I'll be curious to see once we get some numbers back tomorrow on blitz percentages and things like that, how much they actually did blitz. If those numbers are actually up in that 15 to 20% range, I'm really concerned if I'm the Lions and their defense, because they also got crushed by play action today. That touchdown in that far end zone back there to CJ Ham, the second Kirk Cousins pulled that ball and it was play action, you saw Ham leak out. I looked, I just started writing it down because you knew it was a touchdown. He was going to be wide open. And over again, they just got victimized by it. Have to be concerned by injuries, too. If you're Detroit at this point, you've been fairly healthy so far, other than on the defensive line. But now you're starting to lose playmakers. And that's something that I think this team, as well built as they were for depth, that's something they can't afford to lose some of the guys they lost today.
Michael Rothstein, you can read him all week at ESPN.com. We'll have him here next week to talk about whatever happens between the Lions and those G-men. All right, elsewhere around the NFC North, Packers in first place after beating Detroit last Monday. Big day for Aaron Rodgers. Lost one up to Jake Kummerow for a touchdown. Kummerow walking the tightrope down the sideline, diving in. Packers led 21-10 at the half. Third quarter, Rodgers finds Jimmy Graham for the touchdown. In the day, Rodgers would have 6 total touchdowns, 5 passing, 1 rushing. Packers defeat the Raiders 42-24. They look pretty unstoppable at this point. Bears hosting the Saints, a game that required perhaps one of the most beautiful shots on that overhead camera you've ever seen. A 102-yard kickoff return for Cordarrelle Patterson. NFL's next-gen stats calculated he actually ran 130 yards on the return. Bears were down 9-7 at that point. Saints start to pull away from there, though. Latavius Murray punches it in from 3 yards out to increase the lead. New Orleans goes on to win this one 36-25. All right, coming up next, the Pistons, they get their season started on Wednesday. Talk about that with Rod Beard and James Edwards. That's coming up next here on the FamilyDeal.com 7 Sports Gate. Stay with us. Welcome back to the FamilyDeal.com 7 Sports Cave. Time to talk about the fourth franchise in the city that's getting started. Well, the Tigers are done now, so the Pistons are taking their place as the city's most beloved team, right? Rod Beard from the Detroit News and James Edwards from the Athletic.
I'm always weird about that. I don't understand why the people hate the Pistons so much but give the Lions so much rope. They love the Tigers. The Pistons and the Wings are by far the most historic franchise. Like, you can make a case they're both top. They are both top 10 franchises in their sports, and the Pistons don't get treated like it. People love the Tigers and Lions for some reason.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I agree with you because I think, especially this year, as we're diving into the season, and look, the roster changes that they made weren't necessarily like, oh wow, they're going to be a top 3 seed in the East. But they're interesting because of the veterans they brought in. And I guess what's the first thing that jumps off the page when you guys, you've seen him in the preseason, you've seen him throughout training camp and whatnot. Here's the real test of the actual games that count. What's the number one thing fans are going to be like, oh, whoa, what is that?
I think it's Derrick Rose to start out. And he got the MVP chance in one of the first preseason games at home. But it's more of he brings a dynamic game that the Pistons haven't seen, especially off their bench. And Ish Smith was a wonderful, wonderful player, really good guy too, but he didn't have the kind of maestro part of his game that Derrick Rose is going to bring. Get to the rim, finish at the rim, shoot the J. There's so many things that Rose brings.
You got Markieff Morris, a low-end starter, good backup guy. That helps. Derrick Rose, obviously. But I think Luke Kennard being aggressive, the way he shot the ball, just his shot selection hasn't always gone in the preseason, but it's the preseason. But the most important thing is the shots he's been shooting. And you would assume because of how he's shot so far in his career that those shots are going to go in, and it's going to help the Pistons. If he can get 12 to 15 points a game, I think that's going to be great for their ceiling. It's
interesting because it's like we're talking about the veterans and the older guys that this team, obviously Reggie and Andre and Blake and those guys, and then you get this, what do we got with our first-round pick in Sekou Doumbouya? Is this? We know he's going to spend time between Grand Rapids and the Pistons organization, but you guys have seen him play a little bit more than a lot of people have. Is this kid going to crack playing time at the NBA sooner or later?
This year he can, and it's going to depend more on how quickly he adapts in the G League and whether he can start playing like a guy who's been in the NBA or maybe who grew up in the U.S. and is used to it. When he gets the ball, he's more of a traditional European finesse player that plays from the perimeter, and even when he gets it in the paint, he kind of pump fakes and he wants to lay it in, where a lot of kids who grew up in the inner cities and are used to playing hard-nosed blacktop basketball are going to take it and try to dunk it in your face. I haven't seen that from him yet, but it's not to say that he won't get there.
Yeah, I think he had a chance this summer to correct the rotation, like you saw with Dwayne Casey. Bruce Brown, if you could play defense, he's going to throw you in there. And I think Sekou right now, just when I see him, he's a little too lackadaisical. I don't think he really understands kind of how hard he has to play at this level yet. I think he'll be an NBA player. To what extent, we can't tell right now.
19 years old. Try to remember back to when you were 19 years old.
Not even.
He's 19 in December.
Oh, so he's 18 years old.
He's 18,
trying to tie my shoes at 35. I can't even get that right. So trying to go on the road, live in the lifestyle of an NBA player, trying to realize that the grind is every single day. That's something that a lot of people, I think, glance over. It's like, oh, you're in the league. It's like there's a lot of temptation out there. There's a lot of different things that, going to work every single day for these NBA guys is challenging, and especially a kid who's adapting to a culture change as well.
Right, and it's sort of like Andre Drummond. When he came in the league, he was 18 years old, and people have seen the steady progression that he's had to make to mature and get to a point where he can handle all of these things at the same time. And you mentioned the culture change, too. That's going to be something big that Sekou is going to have to adapt to. But the Pistons have recognized that early, and they're already putting people around him who, when he goes to Grand Rapids, are going to be there with him to help him to make those adjustments and alterations.
James, I wanted to ask you about Dwayne Casey now. Second season under him. I feel like he's starting to kind of move the roster and the pieces what he wants this team to look like. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think that the front office knows the style that they want to play, and they went out and did their best to get the guys that can best fit that system. I think the biggest thing for the Pistons is growth within. Derrick Rose, the Pistons are going to be a three-point shooting team and team that wants to get to the basket. Derrick Rose helps get into the basket. He doesn't really help the three-point shooting. The pieces are there on paper, like what these guys are supposed to be. They're supposed to be shooters, but the shots weren't falling last year. That was the big thing. I think I like the style Dwayne had him playing. I thought he had him play in the right way. It's just, what was it? They were 26th in three-point percentage making shots, but top 5 in open threes. They just missed them. And a lot of those misses were from guys that have been pegged as shooters throughout their career and didn't hit shots. So I think they feel a little bit more confident about that. The shooting a little bit. I think there's some worry because they didn't shoot the ball great in the preseason. But Reggie Jackson, hopefully they think he can come around and shake off the preseason jitters and be one of those three-point shooting guys too.
Reggie Jackson, the gift that keeps on giving. We haven't even talked about Blake Griffin yet. I mean, is he back healthy, Rod? Is he going to, kind of show kind of last year that he was still a really relevant superstar, if you will?
I think that's one of the bigger pieces to watch this year, because in the preseason, he barely even got it out of first gear. They don't want to press him. They want to try to do the load management on his number of games that he's playing. But you're kind of caught in a quandary there, because the more games he needs to play, that's going to help you get with your playoff seeding. If he doesn't play a lot of games, you're going to have to do it with other guys who aren't as proven. So the thing to watch is how many games he sits, which games he sits, and does he look the same? Does he look worn down as you get into February and March the way that he did last year?
All right, let me ask you. What do you guys think? Are we going back to the playoffs? Are we going to be on the outside looking in? And I had a tweet during the preseason. Now, again, it's a preseason, but I did bite on that nice game that Derrick Rose had, where he came in at 20-some-odd points in 24 minutes and whatnot. Looked really good, and I said, hey, we might be talking about how high the seed is if he plays like that all season long. You guys have both brought me back to earth, knowing that he hasn't played a full season and is almost his entire career. Yeah. But at the same time, I think I look at this team as a team that can fight for that 5, 6, 7 spot in the playoffs. Am I hitting that right?
Best case, I would say, is somewhere around the 5. But I'll put another caveat on it. If they don't get up to the 6 seed, probably, this whole thing could be completely dismantled in the summertime, because a lot of those contracts are rolling off the books.
I'll do you one better. If they are barely in the playoffs by the deadline, this thing could look completely different.
Absolutely.
Why not? Reggie Jackson's contract's expiring. Andre Drummond seems like he'll have an expiring contract. It seems like he's going to opt out. If Blake is healthy and playing well and they're still struggling, why would you even risk him getting hurt and then he has no trade value? It's going to be an interesting next couple months here with the Detroit Pistons, to say the least. And
their first 25 games that they start, they've got 11 against teams that made the playoffs last year. So they really have to get out to a hot start and get to, 15-10 or probably better than that, 17-8, something like that, that shows that they're going to be a contender as they move forward into November, December.
And very few road trips for the first half of the year. A lot of one-offs. A lot of one-offs, yeah.
All right. Well, hey, if you do one thing tonight, make sure you log on to both of these gentlemen's fine establishments, the Detroit News, of course, and The Athletic. Read these guys. They do great stuff all season long. Guys, thanks for coming in tonight. Always appreciate it.
Thank you as always.
You guys like betting, by the way? Yeah, we're not going to answer that question.
Betting
if you like betting on sports, there's a new place in town for you. How about that for a tease instead? Coming up, I'll take you guys down to MGM Grand Detroit for a new place to go hang out and watch the Pistons play this season. That's coming up next here on the 7 Sports Gate. Stay with us. Welcome back to the FamilyDeal.com 7 Sports Game Cave. Speaking of gaming, sports gambling has still yet to be legalized in the state of Michigan, but a new sports bar is already open with eyes on the future. I recently got a chance to visit Moneyline at MGM Grand Detroit. Take a look at this.
The TVs are everywhere, the action along with it. And if you're looking for a new place to catch the game, look no further than MGM Grand's new sports lounge, Moneyline.
So we're always looking for opportunities to enhance our guest experience. And the one thing we know about our customer base in Michiganders is they're passionate about sports. And we thought this was kind of the natural fit. It's kind of a fun place to hang out, whether it's before or after the game or watch a game and meet up and have some fun and maybe a couple drinks at the same time too.
Now the Moneyline Sports Lounge obviously looks and definitely feels like a sports book in Vegas, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to bring that experience here to Detroit, and while sports gaming isn't an option now, that may not be the case for much longer.
I'm looking to get this done as soon as possible. So if you could place a bet on the Super Bowl in 2020, that would be my goal.
Michigan House Representative Brant Iden has been pushing for legislative changes in sports betting for years. His efforts will go a long way, and when Moneyline will be able to achieve its full potential as a sports book taking wagers from gamblers legally.
Sports betting is taking place illegally. So we think it's kind of a win-win to get it through the regulated channels. The state benefits from a taxation standpoint. We benefit from a business standpoint, and it's jobs.
Now, this is the second time a major set of bills will be pushed to the floor, and while no timetable is certain, surrounding states already up and running ahead of Michigan in sports gaming.
I hope to be able to get this across the finish line by the end of the year, get something to the governor's desk that she can accept. And I want to work with the administration to make sure we get the right policy.
It always gets down to the finer points. Like that first 90% is pretty easy. That last 10% gets a little more challenging, but I think we're headed in the right direction. And I think everyone sees that, long-term legalizing sports betting is the right thing. We're working it every day, and hopefully come Super Bowl, and hopefully the Lions are in the Super Bowl so we can place a wager on them. Would be exciting.
Yeah, about that Lions Super Bowl thing, maybe next year. Anyways, great bar. Check it out sometime. And hopefully we'll be placing some wagers there in the foreseeable future. All right, coming up next, high school game of the week nominees and a couple of final thoughts on that Michigan game from last night. Stay with us. Well, we're down to the final week of the high school regular football season. Nearly 100 playoff spots still up for grabs. So here are the nominees for our Leo's Coney Island Game of the Week. River Rouge versus Southfield A&T. Detroit Cody versus Brother Rice. West Bloomfield versus Warren De La Salle. Detroit Denby versus Detroit King. That's the PSL Championship, mind you. Rochester Adams versus Stony Creek. And of course, you can vote online at WXYZ.com and on the WXYZ app through Wednesday at midnight. Brad Galley live from the winning game on Friday, 5 and 6 o'clock. Highlights and reaction, of course, at 11. All right, let's talk about that Michigan game last night. Disappointing to say the least, but Ronnie Bell, the guy who dropped the ball in the end zone, it happens to almost every receiver at some point throughout their career, a drop when they probably should have had it. But people with the mind to email him telling him that he should be off the team or not come back to practice is sickening. Guys, I understand fans are fans, but don't be fanatical, especially crazy. Ronnie, keep your head up, kid. You'll have better days. That's our show. See ya.